Madhava Radha Madhava Radhe Radha Radha Madhava Radha Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Radhe Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Haribo 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 Nitai Gora Haribo Nitai Gora Haribo 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 Nitai Gora Haribo Jai Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada 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 Jaya Prabhupada Gurudeva Gurudeva Gurudev Jai Jaya Gurudev Jai Jaya Gurudev 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 Jaya Gurudev. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya 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 Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tito Jayamudiraye. For reciting Srimad Bhagavatam, which is a very means of conquest, we first offer respectful obeisances to the personality of Godhead, Lord Narayana. One to Nayana Rishi, the supermost human being, Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and Srila Vyasadeva, the author. Our regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam by rendering service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome within the heart becomes destroyed, practically nil. And thus loving service unto the glorious Lord, who is praised with transcendental hymns, becomes established as an irrevocable fact. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 1, text number 31. Please repeat. Shemam Saha Kachchit Yuyudana Aste Shemam Sakachit Yuyudana Aste Yaha Paguna Labda Danu Rahasya Ya Paguna Labda Danu Rahasya Lebe Injasadokshaja Sevayaiva Lebin Jasadokshaja Sevayaiva Gatim Kadiyam Yatibir Durapam Gatim Tadiyam Yatibir Durapam Shemam sakachit yuyudana aste.
Shemam sakachit yuyudana aste.
Yapungo nalabda danu rahasya.
Yapunalabda danu rahasya.
Labinja sadokshaja sevayaiva.
Labinja sadokshaja sevayaiva.
Gatim tadiyam yati bedurapam.
Gatim tadiyam yati bedurapam.
Shemam sakachit yuyudana aste.
Shemam sakachit yuyudana aste.
Yapalgunalabda danu rahasya.
Yapalgunalabda danu rahasya.
Lebinja sadokshaja sevayaiva.
Lebinja sadokshaja sevayaiva.
Gatim tadiyam yati bedurapam.
Gatim tadiyam yati bedurapayam. Shemam sakachit yuyudana aste.
Shemam sakachit yuyudana aste.
Yapalgunalabda danu rahasya.
Yapalgunalabda danu rahasya.
Labinja sadokshaja sevayaiva.
Lebinja sadokshaja sevayaiva.
Gatim tadiyam yati bedurapam.
Gatim tadiyam yati bedurapam.
Shemam chakashya yudana aste.
Shemam sakachit yudana aste.
Yapalgunalabda danu rahasya.
Yapalgunalabda danu rahasya.
Lebinja sadokshaja sevayaiva.
Lebinja sadokshaja sevayaiva.
Gatim tadiyam yati bedurapam.
Gatim tadiyam yati bedurapam.
Shemam sakachit yuyudana aste.
Shemam sakachit yudana aste.
Yapalgunalabda danu rahasya.
Yapalgunalabda danu rahasya.
Lebinja sadokshaja sevayaiva.
Lebinja sadokshaja sevayaiva.
Gatim tadiyam yati bedurapam.
Gatim tadiyam yati bedurapam.
Shemam sakachit yudana asti.
Shemam sakachit yudana aste.
Yapalaguna abadona rasya.
Yapalgunalabda danu rahasya.
Lebana jasa pasadoda sevya.
Lebinja sadokshaja sevayaiva.
Gatim tadayam yati bedurapam.
Gatim tadiyam yati bedurapam. Shemam. All good. Saha. He. Kachit. Weather. Yuyudanaha. Satyaki. Aste. Is there. Yaha. One who. Bhavgunat. From Arjuna. Labda. Has achieved. Danu rahasya. One who understands the intricacies of military art. Lebe. Also achieved. Anjasa. Summarily. Adokshaja. Of the transcendent. Sevaya. By service.
service.
Eva,
Eva,
certainly.
certainly.
Gatim,
Gatim,
destination.
destination.
Tadiyam,
Tadiyam,
transcendental.
transcendental.
Yatibi,
Jativi,
by great renounces.
by great renouncers.
Durapam,
Durapam,
very difficult to achieve.
very difficult to achieve.
Translation, please repeat. O Uddhava,
O Uddhava,
does Yogindra fare well?
does Yogindra fare well?
He learned the intricacies of military art
He learned the intricacies of military art
from Arjuna
from Arjuna
and attained the transcendental destination,
and attained the transcendental destination,
which is very difficult to reach,
which is very difficult to reach,
even for great renouncers.
even for great renouncers.
Claude, you want to distribute this prasadam to the devotees? These Mangalati sweets from actually the day that I did the Mangalati. That was yesterday. Okay, Srila Prabhupada's Divine Purport. The destination of transcendence is to become the personal associate of the personality of Godhead, who is known as Adokshaja. He who is beyond the reach of the senses. The renouncers of the world, the sannyasis, give up all worldly connections, namely family, wife, children, friends, home, wealth, everything, to attain the transcendental bliss of Brahman happiness. But Adokshaja happiness is beyond Brahman happiness. The empiric philosophers enjoy a transcendental quality of bliss by philosophical speculation upon the supreme truth. But beyond that pleasure is the pleasure enjoyed by Brahman in the form of the personality of Godhead. Brahman bliss is enjoyed by living entities after liberation from material bondage. But Para-Brahman, the personality of Godhead, enjoys eternally a bliss of his own potency, which is called the Aladini potency. The empiric philosopher who studies Brahman by negation of the external features has not yet learned the quality of the Aladini potency of Brahman. Out of many potencies of the omnipotent, there are three features of his internal potency, namely Samvit, Sandini, and Ladini. And in spite of their strict adherence to the principles of Yama, Niyama, Asana, Jnana, Dharana, and Pranayama, the great yogis and jnanis are unable to enter into the internal potency of the Lord. This internal potency is, however, easily realized by the devotees of the Lord by dint of devotional service. Yogindra achieved this stage of life just as he achieved expert knowledge and military science from Arjuna. Thus his life was successful to the fullest extent from both the material and spiritual angles of vision. That is the way of devotional service to the Lord. Thus his life was successful to the fullest extent from both the material and spiritual angles of vision. That is the way of devotional service to the Lord. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport to the 31st verse, 1st chapter, 3rd canto, Srimad Bhagavatam. Questions by Vidura. Shemam sakat chit yuyudana aste yapau guno labda tanu rahasya labdin jasadoksha jaseva yaiva yatim tadiyam yati bedurapam. O Uddhava, does Yuyudana fare well? He learned the intricacies of military art from Arjuna and attained the transcendental destination, which is very difficult to reach, even for the great renouncers. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. I offer my humble obeisances onto the lotus feet of His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, who is opening our eyes with the torch of knowledge in the form of His transcendental books. Wimmarupa Goswami Srila Prabhupada, give us shelter under His lotus feet. Amen. To fulfill the mission of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So here Srila Prabhupada is making a distinction between the impersonalist sannyasis who understand the difference between the body, mind, and soul itself. By, generally speaking, by freeing themselves from the bodily conception of life, by understanding, I'm not this body, I'm not these material elements, I'm not this subtle body, this mind, intelligence, and ego, which haunts me. That I'm beyond that, and they do so by the strict practice of yoga, controlling the mind and senses, and hearing such books as Vedanta Sutra, Bhagavad Gita, etc., but with the objective of understanding the self beyond the body. And many become highly successful at this. And taste the nectar of Brahmananda, or Brahman bliss, or the bliss of identifying with the all-pervading spiritual nature or energy of the Lord. But far beyond the bliss of Brahman, which our acharyas often compared to the water found in the hoof print of a calf. It's not really significant. Whereas the bliss from the ocean of devotion is compared to an ocean. And devotees are always diving into that ocean. So that bliss is attained by devotees. Devotees meaning that one becomes a servant of the Lord, an associate of the Lord, and sees himself as the Lord's eternal servant, generally in one of 5 rasas, especially within 4 of those rasas. One of them is just a neutral state of admiration or admiring the Lord, but in a very neutral state of consciousness, not an active state of service. Whereas the other 4 are involved highly in serving the lotus feet of the Lord. So the devotees, they taste that bliss of our eternal position, our nitya swarup, our eternal position of identifying ourselves as the Lord's servant, or the servant of the servant of the servant of the Lord. Nityo nitya das. I'm the servant of the servant of the Lord. Not in this world, the devotees, every human being identifies with a certain position in this world. But ultimately, the devotee, he thinks, I'm not a Brahmin, I'm not a Khatri, I'm not a Vaishya, I'm not a Sudra. Even I a brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, or sannyasi. I'm eternally the servant of the Lord. Krishna das anudas, servant of the servant of the Lord. That is me. That's my eternal position. I'm the servant of the servant of the servant of the Lord. However, we all appear in this world due to our karma, and we have some position due to the past. And here we see that Yogindra or Satyaki, he was successful both materially and spiritually. So Krishna's devotees are so fortunate, their intelligence is so great that they become successful materially or spiritually. They become successful both materially and spiritually. It doesn't matter with family they're born in, or with their nature of their karma is from the past. That really doesn't matter. The Lord has many devotees who had very humble karma, such as Guru Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj in his grihastha life. He simply was a wala who, sold grain or something like that. You would weigh it on a scale, and according to how much it weighed, the person would purchase it. When his wife passed away, he left it all behind and went to Vandana and took Babaji initiation and spent 30 years, I believe, there before going to Mayapur. He was going blind due to cataracts, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur wanted him to go to Kolkata so he could maintain his sight. But he said he refused to go to Maya. And sometimes he would do some sort of mystical acts of being able to cross the Ganges in the middle of the night or a storm and come to the side of the Ganges that Bhaktivinoda was living on, and they would say, how did you get here? He wouldn't say how he got there. So, devotees, it didn't matter what their background was. Like Satyaki, obviously most fortunate soul, he had attained perfection, he appeared in the same family as Krishna in the Yadu dynasty, so he was an associate of Lord Krishna. Such a great associate, he was the commander-in-chief of the Yadu army, just as the son of Lord Shiva is the commander-in-chief of the celestial army of the Devas. So Yogindra or Satyaki is the commander-in-chief of the Yadu forces. So powerful is he that he was the student of Arjuna, and he knew his fighting was practically on the same level as Arjuna. He is one of the few people that survived the battle of Kurukshetra. Him and one of his relatives, Kritavarma, was another Yadu who fought on the side of the Kauravas. And he survived, along with Kripa-acharya and Ashwatthama. And amongst the army of the Pandus, only the 5 Pandavas in Satyaki. And there may have been somebody else. Sanjay wasn't exactly fighting. He was narrating to Dhritarashtra. So there may have been somebody else, but definitely those 6 on the Pandavas and those 3 on the Kauravas survived the battle, in which like 641 million soldiers, officers, and soldiers of various ranks were all died on the battlefield. So this Satyaki was a very powerful military general. I mean, in terms of our modern days, someone who was like top of the class at West Point, or even you could say the Naval Academy and Air Force Academy and the New Space Academy. He was that brilliant of leaders amongst the martial artists, who in that day and time they also reigned as the governors. Whereas in our world, democratic world, usually in Western countries at least, there's a sort of separation between the military and civilian government. And ultimately the prime minister, I don't know about countries where there's prime ministers, but in America, where there's a president, the president is also the commander-in-chief of the military forces. So the military has many generals and leaders. And sometimes in politics, there becomes a disagreement, because a lot of times the president doesn't come from the military. He's a civil servant. He's a civilian. But when he's elected president, he becomes the commander-in-chief of the military. One instance after World War II is when a very famous World War II general in the American forces who recaptured the Philippines and defeated the Japanese was General MacArthur. And he ran into a dispute with the president in the Korean War. And that president, I don't believe, served in the military. He was the vice president of Roosevelt, and took over when Roosevelt died in office. And somehow ever he was elected, and the next term. He was elected by so close of a margin that the New York Times printed that the opposite person won. But then when it was finally counted out, somehow ever he had achieved victory. So they ran into a conflict. And the president removed MacArthur from office, from serving there. And he had to follow. So, but in Vedic times, the kings played the role of governance as well as military leaders. They had their, you could say, something like in our modern government, our so-called modern government in America, where we have, legislators, such as congressmen, and war can only be declared by the Congress, not by the president. So the kings also had their Brahminical advisors and their royal pandits. And, they would take help from all of their ministers in making their decisions. But ultimately, the king's decision was supreme. Just as Yogindra and Dhritarashtra wouldn't listen to their ministers. They wouldn't listen to Bhishma, they didn't listen to Drona, and they certainly didn't listen to Vidura. Which was very unbecoming of Dhritarashtra, because his father, practically speaking, was Bhishma. And Vidura, his younger brother was his eyes throughout his life. And Drona was the martial guru of his sons, as well as the opposition, the Pandavas. And all of them advised Dhritarashtra not to engage in this war, return what fairly belongs to Yudhisthira to him. We had already made a decision years before that the kingdom would be divided. And Duryodhana got Hastinapur, and Yudhisthira developed Indraprastha. So they lost it in the gambling match, and it was decided that after they fulfilled the requirements that they would receive their kingdom back. So it should be given back. Now, do that. But he opted out for the decision of his son to not give it. And the only way the Pandavas would get it would be to go to war. Which meant that the whole family would become destroyed. They warned him of that. If you allow this war to happen, this is a war between our family. The whole family will be destroyed. But Duryodhana, as good of a diplomat as he was, immediately mounted 13 Aksahini divisions. That means he made an alliance with so many other Kshatriyas around the globe at that time. Very powerful Kshatriyas. Whereas the Pandavas, they could only mount 7. One of them, their father-in-law. Another one, the one where they lived incognito for a whole year and had developed a very close relationship with King, I think his name was Virata or something like that. A very close relationship with him. And so those were 2 of them. And then you had a few other warriors that came to help, like Krishna came just as an advisor in the chariot driver of Arjuna. Satyaki came to help his guru, which was, a huge boon. For example, it was such a great boon that when Arjuna had taken the vow to kill the person who caused the murder of his son, I forget his name right now. His son's name was Abhimanyu, but who was the murderer, or the person who had the boon from Lord Shiva to be able to stop the Pandavas, defeat all the Pandavas one day only, except for Arjuna.
It starts with an S. I forgot.
Can't remember his name. So anyway,
Jayadratha.
Yeah, Jayadratha. He was the brother-in-law of Duryodhana. I guess he married Duryodhana's sister. So he had been humiliated by Bhima and the Pandavas years ago because he had committed an atrocity. He tried to kidnap Draupadi while they were away. And Bhima caught him and humiliated him, of course. He would have killed him, but Yudhisthira gave him his life. So he went and often performed austerities, and in the course of his austerities, he pleased Lord Shiva, and he received the boon. He wanted to kill the Pandavas. Lord Shiva couldn't give him that. He wanted to at least defeat them all. And he said, I cannot give you that boon, but I can give you the boon to defeat all of them except for Arjuna one day. So based on that boon, Dronacharya created a phalanx, or military operation strategy that would mow down all of the Pandavas' forces. And the only person who knew how to break that strategic arrangement was Arjuna. So they arranged that Arjuna would be challenged by some of his arch enemies, who every day they would, sometime or another, they would challenge Arjuna and take him to a far distant part of the battlefield to personally fight with him. And every day Arjuna would mow down these forces with, all sorts of tremendous combat between the two. And so they specifically were given the mission to take Arjuna away from the battlefield early in the morning and to challenge him the whole day despite the loss of their military forces. These were very, very extremely powerful warriors. And so they managed to do that. They fought with Arjuna all day long, and Arjuna could not return to help stop Dronacharya from killing all of their forces. I mean, he was practically destroying the army. And the Pandavas couldn't break the phalanx. Bhima, despite his might, he could not enter into it. And so the army of the Pandavas was becoming destroyed. And Nakula and Sahadev and Yudhishthira also could not break it. Nobody could break that. But they knew that Abhimanyu knew how to break it. But they also knew Abhimanyu hadn't learned, once you entered into that phalanx of forces, you had to know how to come out. Otherwise you would be surrounded. You could only fight for so long and you would have to make your escape before being destroyed. So he didn't know that. He hadn't learned that. So he offered to do it, and they assured him, you open it and we'll follow you in, and then there won't be no problem because, we'll take care of the rest. And so that was the plan. And when they attempted to do it, Jayadratha drove up and amazingly defeated all the other Pandavas. Defeated Yudhishthira, Bhima. Bhima was stunned that Jayadratha could defeat him. Nakula and Sahadev, all of them together, he defeated them all. And before they could enter, they closed up. So I forget exactly how it happened. But, Arjuna was off there fighting. I got it mixed up. Abhimanyu was killed, and when Arjuna found out, he took the vow to kill Jayadratha the next day. And the Kauravas, they loved hearing that. Oh, he's taken a vow that he'll enter into fire if he can't kill the Jayadratha by sunset. All we have to do is protect Jayadratha. So again, Dronacharya makes this military strategic arrangement that's like a needle point, with great powerful soldiers at the tip and most powerful soldiers at the end, all guarding Jayadratha. So Arjuna would have to be able to fight his way from the very front all the way to the back, only to come across Karna and so many other powerful warriors, practically as powerful as him, in order to try to kill Jayadratha. And so he was fighting away like anything. And, they would hear his conch shell. At one time they couldn't hear it, and Yudhishthira became worried. And so he sent Bhima in to help Arjuna. Because otherwise they were having to stay and fight to protect the army. So Bhima went in to help Yudhishthira. And he said, when I find him, I'll let out my war cry, and you know that he is still living. So, for a while they never heard Bhima or anything. So Yudhishthira was again in anxiety. So this time he sent Satyaki. Satyaki entered into the battle, entered into that part of the battlefield. And it is said that the Kaurava forces were devastated. They felt like they were fighting against Arjuna himself. It was a second Arjuna. He was so powerful. Eventually they found Arjuna fighting, and Bhima let out his war cry, but the day was coming to an end. They wouldn't fight at night. You only had these, daytime hours between sunrise and sunset in order to fight. And if the sun set, and Arjuna, despite how well he fought that day, if Jayadratha wasn't killed by him, then he would have to fulfill his vow and enter into fire, which meant that the Pandavas' forces would lose their major military general, who wasn't just a strategic general of planning out the attacks and the defenses, but the person who was also, the top fighter. He would be gone, and the Pandavas would be devastated. They would probably give up the fight, losing their dear brother Arjuna. So it was looking very glim, because the sun's setting. Arjuna is still faced with all these other warriors, including Dronacharya himself. How was he going to defeat them all? His ever guru, Kripacharya, Duryodhana himself, whatever brothers were remaining at that time. There's so many other powerful warriors there. And they were all stopping Arjuna from getting to Jayadratha. And, despite help at that time from Bhima and Satyaki. So that's, when Krishna performed some of his yoga maya. We have to understand this purport, and this purport here. What time does that clock say? 8 o'clock, right?
And he just called also, he's coming. I happened to pick up the phone.
Who is it?
That guy who's supposed to come to the house. In about half an hour he'll be there.
Whoever that is. So, Krishna performs some of his. When Krishna uses his energy, it's just like when we use electrical energy. We can have in one machine. You can turn it on heat. You can turn it on cold. Same electricity. Giving it the power, and it's creating cold air and it's creating hot air. So Krishna, when he utilizes his mystic potency or his energy, he can utilize it as Mahamaya or Yogamaya. Now Yogamaya is the spiritual energy and Mahamaya is the material energy. It is said, as we learned here, that the internal energy, the Yogamaya or the spiritual energy, is Sambit, Sandini, and Aladini. Those equate to what we commonly hear is Satchidananda. So the Sat is the same as Sandini. It's the eternal aspect of the Lord. It's the eternal existence in the spiritual world. It's all those planets and the Jyoti and the atmosphere. It's everything. And the Chit equates to Sambit. It's the cognizant potency of the Lord. And Aladini equates to Ananda, or the pleasure potency of the Lord, ultimately personified by Srimati Radharani. So this is the spiritual energy, whereas Mahamaya is made up of Sattvic, Rajasic, and Tamasic modes of nature. So they're the opposite of the spiritual energy. Instead of being eternal, they're temporary. And instead of being cognizant, they're full of ignorance, darkness, confusion, doubtfulness, unclear. And instead of being happy, joyful, it's ultimately miserable. That's why Krishna says from the highest planet to the lowest planet. But in the material world, it's very hard for people to become Krishna conscious because this material energy, this Mahamaya, is so great. Krishna's energy is also divided into we said the internal, we talked about that. We said the external, we talked about that. But then there's the marginal. And the marginal are the parts and parcels of God who are little bitty fragments of Him. We say, Prabhupada says, part and parcel. The marginal energy, the Jiva Tattva. So the Jiva Tattva can associate with either the Mahamaya, the material energy, or the Yogamaya, the spiritual energy. So when the Jivatma associates with the material energy, it's very difficult to get out. It's like talking to a drunk man. He can't understand what you mean. He only can relate to it as he understands it. And in his drunken condition, it's generally not right. So when the Jivatma is under the influence of material energy, it's very difficult for that person to become Krishna conscious. For example, everyone, I was saying earlier, is born in a certain position due to our karma. And the better the karma, the more difficult it is. For example, yesterday I heard about one man. People would know him. I can't remember his name because I'm not familiar with all these people. But, very great musician. A prodigy. From the time 12 years old, just traveling with the best of the best in American, certain type of American music. And went on to become famous, entered into the Hall of Fame. So how can you ever become Krishna conscious? So to the extent that you understand these things from the time you appear in the world as a baby, you know what your destiny is in this world. And all the devas are blessing you in that destiny. That you're going to be the best of the best when in a certain field. You know, people are going to look up to you. You know, you didn't even have to go to a major school to learn. You were born, you know, in the music world sometimes they say a fallen Gandharva. You know, a person from the celestial worlds who knows music inside and out. So this person was like that. How can they ever become Krishna conscious? They're always concentrating on that art and presenting that art and helping people with that art. And they die living for that art. They marry people who are involved in that art. So unless one somehow ever is also Krishna conscious, like Mangala Ananda, and utilizes that art in Krishna's service, then, you know, you're serving the world of Maya. There's no getting out of service. But who are you serving, Krishna or Maya? You can't escape service. If you don't serve Krishna, you have to serve Maya. And if you don't serve Maya, then you're going to be chastised by Maya. No one escapes service. You know, people get corrected either by the Lord's external energy or internal energy. So when one becomes a devotee, then we learn to take whatever Krishna gives us and use it in his service. And, you know, that is the job of the spiritual master, to distinguish, you know, what this devotee can do for Krishna and engage him in Krishna's service. Engage them in Krishna's service. Then make that arrangement for that person to serve Krishna. Just like at all the big temples that you find in India. You can't just go there and do service. There's generations of families that vie for the privilege of doing service. And once they acquire that service, they never give it up. It stays in their family. So how can a new person show up and do it? You can't. It's impossible. They won't give up their service. It stays within the family. And if somebody, like for example in Puri, even if a great devotee goes there and criticizes them, Lord Jagannath will chastise them. And two examples. Ramanujacharya was kicked out of Jagannath Puri, sent all the way to the south for trying to correct the servants of Jagannath. Another example was the great devotee of Lord Chaitanya, great devotee. Lord Chaitanya called him father because he was none other than Rishabhanu, the father of Radharani. So he made a criticism of the priest of the Jagannath temple. And Jagannath appeared in his dream and slapped his cheek so hard that the next morning when he woke up, his cheeks were all red. He could remember the dream. Jagannath told him, how dare you criticize my devotees? So, you know, when we get the opportunity to meet a devotee, which is compared to something very rare, and that devotee begins to engage us in Krishna's service, we should see that as very rare and very important. Just like Srila Prabhupada engaged Mangala Ananda in writing songs, teaching Krishna consciousness through art and music. And he doesn't do it through, you know, cartels, drums, and cymbals. He does it with a guitar, writing English lyrics of contemporary songs that most people would put into the classification of country and western and soft rock and blues music. So the goal of life is to engage in Krishna's service. But the devotee, he understands he's not the body and he works as a soul. Whereas many times Most of the time, especially in the Kali Yuga, the person in material consciousness, they're thinking they are their body. Indra thinks I am Indra. He's that body and I am Indra. How dare you disrespect me? You will suffer for that. Just like he was going to make the Brajbasis suffer. But Krishna protected them. So, very difficult to get out of the bodily conception of life. The greater one is, the more difficult. At least when one is suffering, that you can cast it aside and say, I renounce it. It's just full of suffering. And I understand what Krishna means, from the highest plane to the lowest plane, in all places of misery. Maybe it's a little bit easier to come to Krishna consciousness then. But the thing is, we have to take up the Lord's service and stay there. And when we get a little bit of, because pure devotional service brings immediate relief from suffering. So we get a little bit free from suffering, and then people want to, now I'm ready. Ready for what? To go back and make money. To enjoy life. The service of the spiritual master possibly becomes secondary. We don't want to do that. Have to make Guru and Granga's service always primary. So anyway, I ran out of time here. Sorry I didn't leave time for questions and answers, but we got to take off. Everybody's got to get their breakfast because it's an open field now. Nobody can complain if it's all gone, so we have to run there before the Yajna takes it all.
You should serve breakfast after Bhagavatam class.
Well, it's supposed to end at 10 after 8.
Oh.
And that's when they start serving out. Because otherwise, devotees, sometimes they'll go into 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Myself included, so we had to do that.